Hello everyone, here I am with a review of the Gamera Trilogy. It wasn't the easiest road, but we're here. Referred to as the 90s Trilogy or the Heisei Trilogy, this group includes Gamera Guardian of the Universe from 1995, Gamera 2 Attack of the Legion from 1996, and Gamera 3 Revenge of Iris from 1999. These three films are the 9th, 10th, and 11th entries in the Gamera franchise. They were all directed by Shizuke Kaneko and written by Kazunori Ito. My understanding is that these were among the last movies to be produced by Daiei before that company was bought out and merged with Kadokawa Pictures. 2006's Gamera the Brave, which I already watched by mistake, is the only Gamera movie to date to be produced by Kadokawa. Interestingly, the trilogy was distributed by Toho, Daiei's big rival in the Japanese movie monster business. We're going to talk about these movies in order, of course. First up is Gamera Guardian of the Universe, Japanese title Gamera Daikaiju Kuchu Kessen, which translates to Gamera Giant Monster Midair Battle. A transport ship is grounded due to the sudden appearance of an atoll, or what they think is an atoll. Elsewhere, there's a report of a large bird attack on an island. Teams are sent to each of these sites to investigate, finding that the atoll contains artifacts from the lost city of Atlantis, and that there are actually 3 giant bird-like creatures wreaking havoc. There's some disagreement between the government, the military, and the scientists about whether to capture or kill these birds. The debate's put on hold, however, when Gamera shows up to take care of the issue himself. Gamera Guardian of the Universe was the first Gamera movie to come out since Super Monster in 1980. It reboots the series, but reuses one of its most popular antagonists, Gaios, who first appeared in 67's Gamera vs. Gaios. I had to watch a dubbed version of this movie on the Internet Archive, which turned out to be very frustrating. I had to keep pausing it so that it could load, and so it took 3 hours to watch a 96-minute movie. Anyway, I mention this because the English-speaking actors pronounced it Gauss. I have no idea if that's how it's supposed to be said, but I feel like I ought to say it that way because that's what they said. Plurality of the proper noun is a bit tricky too. Is one Gauss, I just can't do it. Is one Gauss still Gauss, or are 3 Gausses, or does Gauss cover the singular and the plural? And I found out it's hopeless to try to figure out whether to use the definite article. Gauss did this, the Gauss. Is Gauss the name, or is it the species? Seems to be used interchangeably. None of this is important, but it's the kind of thing that I got hung up on. According to the lore uncovered in this film, the ancient civilization made Gauss, but it, or they, in turn destroyed them. Then Gamera was created to destroy Gauss, and he was left to protect future civilizations should Gauss ever return, which, of course, they does. Whatever. Gamera here is a ferocious-looking giant turtle with a good roar. The digital effects are such that he looks just as good when he takes to the air, at least when he spins into a saucer. When he's flying as a turtle, not so much. And then there's Gauss. These are pretty nasty animals. They perpetually look wet for one thing, which is icky, but more than that, they're bloodthirsty, flesh-eating creatures who go after people, and in one instance, a dog. We get some good attack scenes, including some nifty Gauss vision POV shots. The extent of the monster violence here makes me wonder if that's what some people love about these movies. They're a little more hardcore with the gore than the Godzilla movies tended to be, even in the Heisei series, which did up the ante from the Showa era. Still not realistic, but juicy. Take the scene with the dead baby Gauss who are starving and tried to eat each other, or the scene of Gauss growing, which feels more graphic than it is thanks to the squelchy sound effects. Ugh. Or the scene where the eggs fall out of Tokyo Tower and make a gooey mess. These are pretty lurid images, and coupled with the scenes of Gauss eating people, I'd say it's definitely not a film intended for small children. I do think the Gauss look a little goofy at times, especially in close-ups where the eyes are kinda googly, and while the head design is distinctive, I got a notion it looked like a prehistoric bird of prey wearing a graduation cap shaped like a paper airplane. Once I had that mental image, I couldn't shake it. Da 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 da. As for the human characters, they're okay. It's hard for me to judge. I found a couple of the dubbing actors' performances grating, which is unfair to the characters and to the Japanese actors who play them. Many of you know it's not my preference to watch the dubbed version, and that's one of the reasons why. And by the way, when they dubbed the movie, they neglected to translate the newspaper headlines, so I had no clue what information was being communicated here. The story has 4 primary human characters: an ornithologist, a marine officer, a scientist, and his daughter Asagi. She develops a sympathetic connection to Gamera through an ancient mystical object dug out of what turns out to be his back. I always find bonds like these kind of weird, but not so weird now, considering I had 6 Heisei Godzilla movies to help me get used to it. Not that Miki Sagusa got a wound every time Godzilla was hurt. If she had, she wouldn't have made it through the series. The movie does have quite a few short scenes briefly focusing on inconsequential characters. These feel like filler at times, but the hysterical cab driver is pretty funny.
Oh man, I always wanted to do that!
And hey, popular Godzilla actor Akira Kubo has a cameo as the ship's captain. Like the other 90s kaiju movies I've seen, there is a lot of time spent showing military operations and preparations. A lot of the interpersonal conflict, which leads to the monster problem not being handled efficiently, arises from a bureaucratic tug-of-war. The scientists recognize that Gamera has appeared to get rid of Gauss, but because he's so destructive by virtue of his tremendous size, the SDF, or at least the twerpy guy running things, decides Gamera is the main threat to be disposed of, and they'll just capture Gauss. Time is wasted trying to destroy Gamera instead of Gauss, which is dumb. All they really have to do is ask, which one of these creatures is trying to eat us? Answer, Gauss. So let Gamera do his thing, and he'll go back to wherever he came from. For the ending, it's Gamera versus the remaining Jumbo Gauss, fighting in the air and on land. There's a fun moment when Gauss pursues Gamera up into space, and then they start burning up as they re-enter Earth's atmosphere. That's a nice touch. And the final win is pretty cool, with Gamera, harnessing fire and blasting Gauss so hard he blows its head clean off. The ending obviously hints at a sequel, with a comment suggesting there might be more eggs that could hatch any minute, and if they do, Gamera will come back again to fight. I thought this first movie was alright. I didn't instantly love it, but the second time around, when I got my picks and clips, I liked it better. I think it had to grow on me. Plus, I was better able to appreciate the music, written by Kao Otani, who composed the music for all 3 Gamera Heisei films, and also the music for Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah Giant Monsters All-Out Attack. The second film in the trilogy is Gamera 2, Attack of Legion. I've also seen it referred to as Attack of the Legion, so we've got another optional definite article. I've also seen Assault of the Legion and Advent of Legion. The Japanese word in the title means attack, raid, or invasion, so I think Attack of Legion is probably the most accurate translation. Japan witnesses what's believed to be a meteor shower of epic proportions, but when one so-called meteor crashes and disappears, and there's evidence that it actually slowed down, things start to look suspicious. It gets worse when there's a series of electronic malfunctions accompanying the discovery of a colony of giant murderous alien insects in the subway and the emergence of a giant pod above ground. The pod flowers and prepares to launch a seed into space, but before it can, naval forces spot an unidentified object in the ocean approaching fast. Guess who it is? Yup, Gamera shows up to blast the pod away, and things just get crazier from that point on. I really liked this movie, more than the first one. It helped that I was able to watch the original Japanese version with subtitles, but in general, I liked everything a little better. The setup, the story, the tone, the opponent. There are a few somewhat heavy expository moments with some talk about silicon and oxygen and electromagnetic waves that may or may not be scientifically sound. I don't love this stuff, but it's necessary if you don't want to be left in the dark. I don't mind characters briefly explaining what's going on when there's no chance I'm going to be able to connect all the dots myself. And while we're getting the things I didn't like so much out of the way, there are some unusual uses of freeze frame here. At first, I thought it was just a distracting stylistic choice, and I wasn't a fan, but I did realize later how at least some of these shots were reused as visual aids when characters put two and two together, so as reminders, they ended up being pretty helpful. I do, however, think the wipe transitions are overused. Personally, I'm not a fan of wipes. Excessive use of them reminds me of PowerPoint presentations we made in 7th grade where every transition to the next slide had a different effect just because we could, and it got very old very quickly. Trust me, it's not that bad here, but I did feel like a simple cut would have sufficed. Oh, and the opening scene where NASA detects something on a collision course with Earth, and that one guy's like, let's just tell people it's a freak meteor shower. That was unnecessary. But let's get back to what I liked. It's got some great scenes and imagery. Just the fact that it's such a snowy movie is noteworthy. I'm not sure any other Japanese kaiju movie I've seen has had such a wintry feel. An Arctic scene or two, yes, but I'm talking about snow in the cities where the people are. And given that I was watching this in the lead up to Christmas, it felt appropriate. It was the subway scene that made me realize, hey, this is a horror movie. This sequence is really good. It's dark, you can tell it's building up to something, but you don't know what. There are shadows, eerie noises, extreme close-ups that give you no clear idea what the monster actually looks like. Good stuff. There's a follow-up subway scene that's also good, and again we get some monster vision. There's also a brief alien dissection scene, which made me nervous because I've seen enough movies to know what that can lead to. Compared to what I was bracing for, it was tame, but I appreciate the inclusion of the scene and what it does for the overall atmosphere anyway. There are 3 primary human characters. One is Midori Honami, who, well, I'm not sure what her position is exactly, but she works in some capacity at the Space Center. It's she who's able to make a lot of the connections that point the others in the right direction. She's joined by her friend and colleague Obitsu, an engineer, and by Watarase, a colonel in the SDF. Watarase sides with her in wanting the SDF to lend support to Gamera and not leave him hanging. And is it just me, or is there a little spark between them? Founded on mutual respect, of course. I know characters rarely pair up in these movies, but I, for one, detected something there. I also recognized 3 characters who come back from the first movie. Nice continuity. One is the goofy detective. He's working as a security guard now, having decided after his run-in with Gauss that he wasn't cut out for that kind of work. But he can't get away from his bad luck. He's the first to witness an alien bug. The second returning character is the guy who seems to be in charge of the self-defense force. Though the SDF came around to helping Gamera before, they're dragging their feet again. He doesn't think it wise to trust Gamera as an ally, which makes us all yell, "Did you learn nothing from the first movie?" The third is Asagi Kusanagi, the professor's daughter who has a psychosympathetic connection with Gamera. She's played by Ayako Fujitani, who, hey, I just found out is the daughter of Steven Seagal? What? She doesn't do as much in this movie. She mostly looks meaningfully at Gamera and wills him to be strong and victorious. Our hero gets a good introduction. I love that the unknown aquatic object is identified as Gamera right away, like his reputation precedes him, and then immediately everyone in the vicinity is like, uh-oh, why is he here? Because they know the last time Gamera showed up, it was only because they were in big trouble. It begs the question, are we in more danger than we realize? It does feel like Gamera isn't active in the movie as much, but when he is there, he lets out enough roars to satisfy his fans. As for Legion's complicated to talk about. When I first saw the title, I wondered if it was a Bible reference or a military term. Turns out, it's kind of both. When the alien bugs, or insectoid extraterrestrials if you prefer, emerge from the subway, one of the soldiers quotes Mark 5:9. Contextually, that's the healing of the demon-possessed man. Jesus asks the demon his name, and he says, "My name is Legion, for we are many." But it's also an appropriate name to describe how they operate, like a strictly disciplined military unit. That's a dark scene, the moment when they come marching out and absolutely cover Gamera. The idea of being swarmed by these critters, ugh! Obviously, they're not real, but still gives me the creepy crawlies. Gamera prevails, but only because they get attracted to something else. He gets out of there as fast as he can, but it's an erratic takeoff, and he sprays green blood in his wake. And shortly after that, they introduce the twist. All of the alien bugs are dead except one, and that big survivor takes flight. This individual monster is also called Legion, and it's impressively ugly and bizarre. I'm not sure if it keeps getting bigger, or if that's an illusion, or different camera angles are revealing more parts. Gamera definitely looks smaller in comparison to this enormous crab, scorpion, beetle, facehugger, walking power tool. I saw it referred to as the Queen online, but since I'm not sure when the film established that, I'm not gonna run with it. I'm not sure that it's pure flesh and blood either. When it moves and roars, it makes a metallic sound. And since it's from outer space, I wouldn't have been at all surprised if they'd revealed it was a mecha of extraterrestrial design. I have come to appreciate these big, ugly, what am I even looking at kaiju. They're fascinating and confusing and weird, often gross. This one was not so gross. It wasn't, slimy or drippy or pulsating enough. Legion also reminded me of the Muto from Godzilla 2014. The gray coloring, the angular limb design, the glowing sack that has little legions in it, the sound effects. Does anyone else see the resemblance, or is it just me? This film does seem more serious for the most part. It has its moments, especially when Midori Honami has the two men in her room and her strict father is like, "What's going on up there?" but her mother keeps yanking him back. But it definitely aims to be taken seriously. Again, there's a lot of time spent showing military preparations, and there's friction over whether or not they should jeopardize their own men and equipment to come to Gamera's aid. It's announced that the threat Japan is facing is such that the SDF must be deployed in compliance with the provision made under Article 9. These films have seldom dealt with that subject. The only one I've seen discuss it at length, I think, is Shin Godzilla. This leads to shots of nervous troops preparing to use powerful weapons they're not familiar with, and hoping they work. Asagi's not the only one with a connection to Gamera this time. This movie has more of that unexplainable natural sympathy between Gamera and children than the first one did. After knocking over the second pod, which detonated in a massive explosion, Gamera sits frozen in place, presumed dead. The children gather and hold a vigil, silently urging him to wake up, which of course he does. There are some good visual effects all around. The final fight is pretty dark, but all the better to see the laser show. There is a generous helping here of, I have no idea what that is, but it looks cool. It seems like Gamera can't win until he does whatever this is, gathers firepower from around the world so he can open up his chest and blast fire out of it. I don't know. It's a nice trick, and the music's great. The movie ends with an epilogue, another environmental message warning that since Gamera is the Earth's guardian, we'd better stop destroying the planet if we don't want him to turn against us. It's another sequel hint like the end of the first movie, so let's see if either of these warnings comes to fruition. Hey! Weaselberry 1 week later here. I had to wait a while to get to watch the third movie, which in a way is fitting since there was a 3-year gap between the second one and the third one. The final film in the trilogy is Gamera 3, Revenge of Iris. The Japanese title is Irisu Kakusei, which translates to Awakening of Iris, but Revenge of Iris is the better title because revenge is what this movie's all about. The copy I watched, by the way, had this cover art, and I really like it. It reminds me of the Tokyo SOS poster design. The film starts with Dr. Nagamine, the ornithologist from Gamera Guardian of the Universe, arriving at a small village on the equator to find a dead Gauss. Welcome to the movie! Shortly after, another Gauss, this one in flames, drops out of the sky into Tokyo, Gamera coming in hot on its heels to finish the job. That is a bit of a pun, sorry. Throughout the film, there are more reports of Gauss sightings and attacks around the world and of Gamera showing up to fight. We don't see any of these global encounters, however. The story actually centers around Ayana Hirasaka, a girl whose parents were crushed to death when Gamera tore through their building 4 years earlier. A foster family has taken her and her little brother into their home in a remote village, but she's unhappy. She's bitter about the past, and though others insist Gamera is a friend, she hates him for killing her parents. Dared by bullying classmates to enter an ancient shrine and disturb a sacred rock, Ayana has no idea she's setting a trail of events in motion. An egg emerges, which hatches some kind of creature that Ayana lovingly names Iris after her dead cat. She vows to take care of Iris until one day it is big enough to go after Gamera and get her revenge. But Iris is more powerful and more destructive than Ayana knows. It bonds with her, but the connection may be more parasitic than friendly. Fueled by their joint hatred of Gamera, Iris is about to do what Ayana wants, but Ayana herself might be destroyed in the process. That's the best way I can think of to describe what this movie's about, because in reality, there's so much going on. So many characters, so many concepts, so much weirdness. I found it challenging to follow, and consequently, more difficult to stay engaged. It might be one of those cases where you're better off knowing something of the plot beforehand so you can enjoy the movie and not have to work so hard to figure out what's happening. It's simplest to think of it as a story of a young girl's grief. This grief turns into a hunger for vengeance. Unable to take Gamera on herself, she mistakenly puts her faith in an uncontrollable creature that doesn't just go after Gamera, but harms humans, including people the girl cares about. Viewed from that perspective, it's a compelling story with a sympathetic, if confused, protagonist. I kind of wish the movie had kept it that simple. Like I said, there's a lot going on. In addition to the revenge plot and all that goes with it, there's the return of Gauss. Whether this is related to Dr. Nagamine's prediction at the end of the first movie about ancient eggs turning up somewhere is not clear. I guess since the whole Gamera versus Gauss thing has been done before a couple times, they didn't want to hash it out again. So while this element opens the film and is alluded to throughout, it's a conflict that becomes more of an afterthought, and I'll talk more about that in a bit. There's also the military/bureaucratic subplot where, again, the government tells the SDF that Gamera is the primary target to take out, so while he's fighting the life-draining tentacle monster, he's also got to deal with the military firing at him. There's also the boy who likes Ayana even though she gives him the cold shoulder, who is also the descendant of the keepers of the shrine, who's supposed to guard the rock, and who is supposed to use a special dagger in case of emergency. This adds an interesting dynamic where he's trying to do his duty and rescue the girl he likes, but she doesn't want to be rescued. And there's the ancient mythology angle about the guardians of the north and the south having to fight each other, and the mana, the supernatural force in all living things, which somehow ties everything together. All this relates to why there have been so many monsters appearing, but don't ask me to explain it. This was the most difficult aspect of the movie for me to get into. I don't care for mysticism plots, for starters, and the connection between the myths and the reality, not real, obviously, but what I was seeing on the screen seemed a tenuous one, and the two characters chiefly involved with all this were so strange. When these two were introduced, I thought they were villains. I was thinking either aliens or maybe cult worshippers. Having gone through the movie twice now, I'm still not sure how I was supposed to feel about them, but I do know that I was wrong. It turns out the woman isn't really sinister like I initially thought. She's trying to help restore peace and balance, I think, to fight the evil spirit, and the fact she and the girl have the same hairstyle is just a coincidence. She's working with this mysterious game designer, and he's the really weird one. I couldn't figure out if he was supposed to be good or bad, a cynical philosopher or comic relief, an awkwardly friendly guy, or a creep. The more I saw of him, the less I liked the way he would stand there smirking and monologuing, and I figure I was justified in my reaction because it's pretty clear Dr. Nagamine doesn't like him either. There's also the whole bonding thing, which I mentioned earlier in this video, is not the easiest hurdle for me to jump over. But wow, Ayana's fusion with Iris is so much more bizarre than Asagi's bond with Gamera. It's disturbing, I think, because Ayana is so willing to be, whatever you want to call it, absorbed. She doesn't see how alarming this situation is, partly because Iris is like her pet, and partly because her hatred for Gamera is all-consuming. She's an easy target for Iris to take advantage of, and once they're fused together, Gamera supposedly cannot stop them. Let's talk more about the monsters. We've got Iris, which is... well, there's a reference to a phoenix or a firebird, so I guess that's what it's supposed to be. Iris is a new creature that is born from the dead Gauss, I think. In hatchling form, it's kinda cute in a slimy, might snuggle you or might kill you way. When it becomes one with Ayana, or whatever is going on there in the forest, it turns into some kind of Lovecraftian Pokemon figure, and it keeps getting bigger as it eats, sucking food in not through a mouth, but through its tentacles. This movie gave us not one but two creepy corpses, one of them a successful jump scare, and there was another instance of monster vision. As was the case with Legion, Iris's advanced form looks and sounds more mechanical in design, like some kind of organic robotic hybrid. A lot of digital effects were used for this movie, resulting in some cool shots, including this one of Iris flying above the clouds at night, and this one showing the beginning of the fight with Gamera reflected in a puddle. Meanwhile, Gamera isn't in the movie a whole lot. I'm guessing this had to do with budget constraints. Our first glimpse of him is in the flashback sequence, where he looks a bit different, with those spooky white eyes, but his proper introduction comes when he fights Gauss in Tokyo. There are several shots taken from street level to emphasize Gamera's immense size. It's a chaotic fight. I feel like I've been dropped into the middle of the match with no sense of who's winning. Although the fact that Gauss fell in there with his eyeball dangling out of his head, gross, does give you a hint of how it's going. Gamera disposes of Gauss with a final fireball, making it so that any parts of the city that weren't already in flames are swallowed up in the conflagration. The sight of people getting blown away by this fireball doesn't exactly endear me to Gamera, and news footage the next day reporting some 10 to 15,000 casualties certainly makes the case against him even stronger, which makes it all the easier to sympathize with Ayana. The final showdown here is, I think, the most bombastic of the three films. Gamera burns off his own hand to stop Iris from sucking away his life force, and then pulls out Iris's guts with his fist, and there's just gore gushing out. I can't really explain what happens in more specific or accurate terms without looking at a descriptive, play-by-play summary on a fan site. It's just one of those endings. But it ends with another huge explosion, and Gamera saves Ayana's life, even though she tried to kill him. Going through the movie again to get my picks and clips, which is something I learned a long time ago I should do before I film the video, it wasn't as confusing. Naturally, I knew where it was going, and there were things I had missed the first time around, so I felt better about it. But there are still things that seem to get more emphasis than is necessary, like the mean girls who pick on Ayana and her brother just because they're from the city, and things that I know are supposed to be significant, but I don't really get why, like the reveal of the underwater graveyard of dead would-be Gameras. What surprised me most, at least the way I viewed it, is that there isn't a final resolution. We see a flock of Gauss heading straight for Japan, and a one-armed Gamera limping through the flames to meet them. He's in bad shape, so even though all of Japan's forces are finally coming to his aid, and it's implied he'll be victorious, I don't feel it's a certainty. I suppose there's a statement in there, Gamera's work is never done, he must drag himself from one battle to the next to save the planet, but the big question mark of it all surprised me. And then I was further confused by the final shot, the title drop that is not the title of the movie. Lest any of you misunderstand me and come away thinking I didn't like this movie, though, let me clarify that I did like it well enough. Not as much as movie number 2, and I'm not sure if I liked number 1 better or not. It's hard to say because my experience watching Guardian of the Universe was so choppy, it really isn't fair to compare, but I think that at its core, number 3, Revenge of Iris, has a better story. There's just so many other things going on that it kind of distracts from that, but it was entertaining. All 3 films are entertaining. This one has cool visuals and interesting story twists. I liked the music in the whole trilogy. I didn't know Gamera's theme going into this, but I do now, and I liked that a few characters make a reappearance. I'm pleased to report that I liked Dr. Nagamine better this time around, without the annoying voice dub. A voice can convey so much personality, and the Japanese actress's natural voice is so much more palatable to me than the dubbing actresses. I was surprised to see that they brought back this character with the glasses, who in the first one had wanted to kill Gamera and capture Gauss before he was in opposition to Dr. Nagamine, and now he's on the other side and giving her helpful intel. I didn't like him in the first movie, so I wasn't exactly excited to see him again here, but they did give him the one line in the movie that made me laugh.
なぜこうも立て続けにこの日本が怪獣に襲われるのか。
There are 2 characters who appear in all 3 entries of the trilogy, and I appreciate that continuity. One is Osako, the former detective and now former security guard. Dr. Nagamine spots him working on the street and recognizes him. He's embarrassed by his situation and pretends to be someone else, but later she tracks him down again and they have a heart-to-heart that encourages him to get his life back in order, and they go out investigating again. I had no idea when I watched the first movie that he would get this level of character development over the course of the series. Unfortunately, though he gets to redeem himself, it doesn't exactly lead anywhere. He does help move one character from point A to point B, but his ultimate fate is vague and probably not good. But it's a better character arc if you don't think about that. The other character is Asagi Kusanagi, the girl who bonded with Gamera. As in the second movie, she's not really essential to the plot here, but she's kind of the linchpin that ties the series together. She doesn't seem to have that bond with Gamera now that the special artifact is broken, but she's along for the ride to provide some exposition and some assistance. And more than anyone else, she's able to understand the bond Ayana has with Iris. The presiding question in the trilogy seems to be, is Gamera our friend or not? I like that it's left kind of open-ended. The third film especially emphasizes the casualties, the destruction caused when Gamera appears, but at the same time, he does save some people's lives. I do think the trilogy's final hypothesis is that Gamera is not necessarily our friend. Men and man-made structures are disposable to him because it's the Earth he's here to protect. And going along with the environmentalist themes, that's supposed to be okay because it's man who is destroying the Earth. So if there are a few human casualties along the way to saving the planet, it's for the greater good. I am not on board with that view. I don't embrace that argument, but that's another discussion, and we're not going to get into that. If we're going to compare this trilogy to the last 3 films of the Heisei Godzilla series, and it seems a natural thing to do so because they came out around the same time, these immediately followed those, and they're both trilogies, I definitely liked the Godzilla ones better. That trilogy, Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2, Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla, and Godzilla vs. Destoroyah, had a more defined beginning, middle, and end. The final entry was a satisfying conclusion and the strongest of the 3. It's always nice to end on a strong note, and I felt more emotionally invested in the storyline overall. But while these movies haven't made me a Gamera fan, they are, like I said, entertaining, they're fun, they're wacky, they're a little gross sometimes, and I'm glad that after all this time and all those requests and recommendations, I was finally able to get a chance to see them. Those are my thoughts on the Gamera trilogy. I hope you enjoyed the video, especially those of you who've been waiting a long time for it. I hope that in some way it met your expectations. Please feel free to share your own thoughts on any or all of these films in the comments below. I look forward to reading them. Thanks for watching.